Have you ever noticed that some people can fool almost everyone, yet somehow end up revealing who they really are without even realizing it? Maybe you've experienced this before. At first, the person seemed trustworthy. Their words were exactly right. Their gestures seemed sincere. They said exactly what you needed to hear. And yet, something felt off. A feeling that was hard to explain. A quiet discomfort. As if a part of you could see something your eyes hadn't recognized yet. What's most interesting is that, most of the time, that feeling was right. We live in a world where people have learned to manage their image. They carefully choose what they show, what they say, and how they want to be perceived. They create polished versions of themselves. Social masks. Personas. But there's one problem that few people truly understand: no one can wear a mask all the time. Eventually, the truth slips out. Carl Jung dedicated much of his life to studying this exact phenomenon. He believed that every human being has a hidden side of their personality, something he called the shadow. The shadow contains everything we try to hide, deny, or repress. And the harder someone tries to appear perfect, the more energy they must spend hiding what truly exists beneath the surface. But the human mind has limits. No matter how carefully someone controls their words, certain signals always escape. Small contradictions. Unexpected reactions. Subtle shifts in behavior. Unconscious facial expressions. Actions that don't match the narrative. And that's exactly where fake people end up revealing their true nature without realizing it. The problem is that most people have been trained to pay attention only to what's being said. Very few observe what truly matters: patterns. Because words can be planned. Repeated behavior cannot. Maybe you've met someone who constantly talked about loyalty but disappeared when you needed them. Or someone who preached kindness and empathy while criticizing others behind their backs. Maybe you've known people who seemed genuine in public but became completely different when no one was watching. And the more you begin to notice these patterns, the harder they become to ignore. What's interesting is that this doesn't only happen with other people. Many times, we wear masks too. We also try to hide parts of ourselves in order to be accepted, admired, or approved of. And that's exactly why understanding the psychology behind fake people goes far beyond simply learning how to identify manipulators. It's about understanding how human nature truly works. Because there's a reason some people can see the truth before everyone else. There's a reason certain intuitions feel so accurate. And there's a reason highly conscious individuals tend to notice signs that most people completely miss. Throughout this video, you'll discover how fake people end up revealing who they really are without realizing it, the signs that almost nobody notices, and why Carl Jung believed that whatever we try to hide will always find a way to surface. And the most surprising part is that the first sign doesn't appear when the mask completely falls off. It shows up much earlier, in such a subtle way that most people never notice it. Before we continue, I want to ask you for one quick favor. If at any point during this video you've thought of someone, felt that uncomfortable realization that certain people aren't exactly who they claim to be, or if this message resonates with you, leave a like right now. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it helps this message reach people who are going through their own psychological awakening and need to see what has remained hidden for far too long. And I want to ask you a question as well. Have you ever discovered that someone was completely different from the image they tried to project? If so, comment the phrase, "The mask fell off." Or share, in your own words, an experience that revealed someone's true face to you. Many times, when we read the comments, we realize we're not alone in certain experiences, and that makes this journey of self-discovery even more meaningful. And if you enjoy content about deep psychology, human behavior, manipulation, self-awareness, consciousness, and the teachings of Carl Jung, make sure to subscribe to the channel now. Because the next videos aren't made for people who simply want to hear comforting words. They're for people who want to see what usually goes unnoticed. For those willing to understand the hidden dynamics of human relationships, recognize psychological patterns, and develop a level of perception that most people never achieve. Now, there's something that almost nobody understands about fake people. They believe they're fooling everyone. They believe the mask is flawless. They believe they can control the image others have of them. But there's a fascinating detail about human psychology that Carl Jung understood deeply. What we try hardest to hide usually finds a way to reveal itself. And that's exactly where the masks begin to crack. And where the most important signs begin to appear. The great irony about fake people is that it's almost never others who discover who they truly are first. Most of the time, a part of you notices the signs long before anyone else, but chooses to ignore them. And that happens because seeing the truth about someone can be too painful. Sometimes it's easier to believe the version someone presents than to accept what their actions are quietly trying to reveal. Maybe you've been through this. Maybe you've met someone who seemed incredibly kind, understanding, and trustworthy. Someone who always knew the right thing to say. Someone who appeared to understand your pain. Someone who seemed genuinely interested in your life. And for a while, everything made sense. But somewhere inside you, there was an uneasy feeling that was difficult to explain. It wasn't logical. It wasn't based on hard evidence. It was just a feeling. A small voice telling you that something wasn't adding up. But you ignored it. Because you wanted to believe. Because you wanted to trust. Because admitting that feeling would mean questioning someone you admired, loved, or deeply valued. And this is exactly where one of the greatest psychological conflicts Carl Jung observed throughout his life begins. According to Jung, there's a huge difference between what a person shows the world and what truly exists within them. He called one of these layers the persona. The persona is the social mask. It's the image we build in order to be accepted. All of us have a persona to some degree. It's part of being human. The problem begins when the mask becomes more important than the truth. When someone starts living only to maintain an image. When appearance matters more than essence. When the need for approval becomes greater than authenticity. At that point, the person begins to drift away from who they truly are. And the greater that distance becomes, the harder it is to hide the contradictions. Because truth has an interesting characteristic. It always looks for a way out. No matter how sophisticated a mask may be, it requires constant effort to maintain. And nobody can perform perfectly forever. That's why fake people reveal their true face in the moments when they least realize it. Not during their speeches. Not when they're trying to impress others. Not when they're carefully managing their image. But in the small details. In impulsive reactions. In moments of frustration. In situations where they don't get what they expected. Because those are the moments when the mask weakens. And what was hidden begins to leak through. Maybe you've noticed this before. A person seems extremely polite, until they're challenged. They seem humble, until they gain power. They seem loyal, until a better opportunity appears. They seem empathetic, until someone truly needs them. And then, suddenly, something changes. For a few seconds, their real personality shows itself. Not because they wanted to reveal it. But because they couldn't hide it. Carl Jung said that everything that remains unconscious eventually manifests itself in some way. And that includes hidden intentions, buried resentment, repressed envy, and desires a person desperately tries to deny. The harder someone struggles to appear like something they're not, the greater the internal pressure becomes. And eventually, that pressure finds a crack. What's fascinating is that highly conscious people tend to notice those cracks long before everyone else. Not because they're better than others, but because they've learned to look beyond words. They pay attention to patterns, to inconsistencies, to subtle shifts in behavior, to details that most people overlook. And perhaps that's one of the reasons you feel different from so many people around you. Because while others analyze speeches, you observe actions. While others listen to promises, you notice behavior. While others are captivated by the surface, you sense that something deeper is happening underneath. And that can be a gift. But it can also be a burden. Because seeing what others don't often leads to disappointments others never experience. You begin to notice hidden agendas, subtle manipulation, silent competition, false displays of affection, emotional games disguised as friendship. And the more your awareness awakens to these dynamics, the harder it becomes to pretend you don't see them. Maybe that's why some of the deepest emotional wounds don't come from obvious enemies. They come from people who seem to be on your side. People who built such a convincing image that you never imagined what was hiding behind it. But there's something even more intriguing. Because sometimes fake people don't reveal who they are through something they do. Sometimes they reveal who they really are through what they cannot hide when they witness someone else's success, growth, or transformation. There's a very common belief that prevents most people from ever seeing who is truly beside them. We believe fake people are easy to identify. We imagine someone who is obviously manipulative, arrogant, jealous, or malicious. We assume dishonesty always comes with obvious warning signs. But that's exactly where the mistake lies. Because the easiest people to identify are rarely the most dangerous. And that's a truth very few people are prepared to accept. Most fake individuals don't present themselves as a threat. Quite the opposite. They usually appear as exactly what you hope to find. Friendly, pleasant, helpful, and often extremely charismatic. They know how to build a connection quickly. They know how to make you feel understood. They know exactly what people want to hear. And that's why so many people get fooled. Not because they're naive, but because they're looking for the wrong signs. Maybe you've been taught to be wary of aggressive people, of individuals who openly reveal their intentions. But rarely does anyone teach us how to recognize those who hide their true motives behind a carefully crafted image. Carl Jung understood this phenomenon deeply. He observed that what a person tries to hide from themselves often becomes the most powerful force driving their behavior. And this is where something seemingly contradictory emerges. Many fake people don't even realize how fake they are. That's right. Not all deception is conscious. Not every mask is worn deliberately. Some people spend so much time playing a role that they eventually begin to believe it. They build an identity based on other people's approval. They create such an elaborate persona that they lose touch with what they truly feel. And when that happens, they're no longer just deceiving others. They're deceiving themselves. Maybe that explains something you've noticed before but never quite found the words for. Have you ever met someone who seemed incredibly kind, yet showed a strange discomfort whenever someone else received recognition? Someone who claimed to support your dreams, but whose energy shifted when you started succeeding? Someone who praised you in public, yet slipped subtle criticisms disguised as concern when you were alone together? These contradictions rarely happen by accident. And this is where most people misinterpret what they're seeing. When they notice these signs, they immediately search for a logical explanation. They think maybe they misunderstood. Maybe they're overreacting. Maybe it's just an impression. But there's a huge difference between judgment and perception. Judgment comes from haste. Perception comes from observation. And conscious people learn to respect what they perceive even before they can explain it. Because many times, the unconscious mind picks up on something long before the rational mind can organize the information. It's like walking into a room and sensing a strange tension without knowing exactly why. Or talking to someone and noticing that something feels out of alignment between their words and their energy. You can't prove it. You can't demonstrate it. But you feel it. And there's almost always a reason for that. The problem is that we've been conditioned to doubt our own perception. We've learned to trust appearances more than signals. Speeches more than behavior. Promises more than patterns. And while we do that, we end up placing our trust in people who have spent years perfecting the art of appearing to be something they're not. But there's another detail that's even more surprising. Very often, a person's true face doesn't show itself when everything is going well. It appears when you change. When you grow. When your awareness awakens. When you start setting boundaries. When you stop seeking approval. When you stop accepting emotional breadcrumbs. Because your transformation forces others to reveal who they truly are. Think about that for a moment. As long as you remain predictable, almost anyone can maintain a mask. But once you begin to grow, the reactions start to appear. Some people celebrate your evolution. Others merely tolerate it. And some reveal a discomfort they had never shown before. That's when the truth begins to seep through the cracks. Because a mask was created to deal with a specific version of you. But when you transform, it no longer works the same way. And that's when the different looks appear. The passive-aggressive comments. The disguised criticism. The sudden distance. The subtle shifts in behavior. Everything that was hidden slowly begins to surface. And perhaps the hardest realization is understanding that some people were never by your side because of who you truly are. They were by your side because of the version of you that was convenient for them. But there's an even deeper sign, one that's almost invisible to anyone who hasn't developed enough self-awareness to recognize it. A sign that Carl Jung would have directly linked to the human shadow, and one that often exposes what a person is trying to hide even from themselves. There's a reason some people react strangely the moment you begin to thrive. And that reason has far less to do with you than you might imagine. To understand this, we need to explore one of Carl Jung's most profound and transformative concepts, the shadow. Jung believed that every human being possesses a hidden part of the personality, a psychological territory where we store everything we don't want to acknowledge within ourselves. Fears. Insecurities. Impulses. Resentments. Envy. The need for control. The desire for validation. Feelings of inferiority. None of these things simply disappear because we choose to ignore them. Quite the opposite. The more we try to hide these traits, the more power they gain in the unconscious. And here's what's fascinating. The shadow rarely reveals itself directly. It prefers to project itself outward. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When we first hear that quote, it sounds simple. But when we truly understand its meaning, we begin to see people in a completely different way. Because very often, what someone criticizes most in others is exactly what exists within them. The person who constantly accuses others of being fake may be hiding their own lack of authenticity. The person who endlessly talks about loyalty may be struggling with impulses of betrayal they refuse to acknowledge. The person who condemns everyone else's arrogance may be trying to hide an enormous sense of superiority. And the less aware someone is of their own shadow, the more intensely they project it onto others. Maybe you've known someone like that. Someone who always seemed to be pointing out flaws. Always identifying problems. Always finding something to criticize. At first, you might even believe that person is highly observant. Extremely insightful. Exceptionally self-aware. But over time, something strange happens. You begin to realize that their accusations reveal more about them than they do about anyone else. And that's when the true face begins to emerge. Because the shadow leaves traces. It leaks through words, through judgments, through exaggerated emotional reactions, through constant comparisons, through silent resentment. A balanced person may feel envy from time to time. That's human. But they recognize the feeling, work through it, and seek to understand it. A person dominated by their shadow does something different. They turn envy into criticism, their insecurity into judgment, their fear into control, their feelings of inferiority into arrogance. And then they create stories to justify it all. What's most fascinating is that many of these people genuinely believe they're right. Because the shadow is a master of illusion. It convinces people that the problem is always outside of them. Always in other people. Always in the environment. Always in circumstances. Never within themselves. And perhaps that's why fake people have such a hard time dealing with individuals who have developed self-awareness. Because those who dive deeply into themselves begin to recognize their own shadow. They start seeing their contradictions, their fears, their vulnerabilities, their imperfections. And that creates something incredibly rare. Awareness. A conscious person doesn't need to pretend to be perfect. They don't need to build a flawless image. They don't need to waste energy maintaining a mask. They can simply be who they are. And that authenticity often has an unexpected impact on those who are trapped in appearances. Because authenticity exposes artificiality. Without attacking. Without accusing. Without proving anything. Simply by existing. Maybe you felt this before. Maybe your mere presence made someone uncomfortable without you understanding why. Maybe your calmness triggered irritation. Maybe your growth provoked resistance. Maybe your emotional independence created distance. And for a long time, you may have believed you were doing something wrong. But that's not always the case. Sometimes, your awakened awareness acts like a mirror. And some people spend their entire lives trying to avoid mirrors. Because mirrors show them what they don't want to see. They reveal the masks. They reveal the contradictions. They reveal the internal conflicts. They reveal the distance between the persona and the truth. That's why certain people can maintain a flawless image in front of hundreds of people while displaying completely different behavior behind closed doors. The mask was built for the world. But the shadow is still there. And no matter how sophisticated the performance may be, there is a specific moment when the shadow almost always takes over. A moment when a person stops revealing only small cracks and begins, without realizing it, to expose what truly governs their choices, relationships, and deepest intentions. There comes a point when almost every mask loses its power. It doesn't matter how intelligent, charismatic, or skilled someone is at managing their image. It doesn't matter how many years they have spent perfecting their persona. Eventually, what is hidden inside them takes control. And interestingly, this moment almost never happens when everything is going well. It happens when the person loses control. When they don't receive the admiration they expected. When they are challenged. When they feel threatened. When someone around them begins to grow. That is when their true face starts to become much clearer. Because psychological pressure has an extraordinary ability to reveal a person's true nature. Carl Jung observed that whatever is not brought into consciousness ends up governing our lives. And when repressed emotions remain hidden for too long, they inevitably find a way out. Think about someone who has built their entire identity around the need to be admired. As long as they receive attention, praise, and validation, they may seem incredibly pleasant. They may seem generous. They may seem friendly. They may seem emotionally balanced. But what happens when someone else begins to receive the spotlight? What happens when someone close to them achieves something they have not yet achieved? What happens when the focus is no longer on them? That's when something interesting begins to emerge. Small expressions. Subtle comments. Tiny shifts in energy. And often, those signs reveal far more than any speech ever could. Because words are chosen. Spontaneous reactions are not. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. Maybe you shared an accomplishment expecting support and received a cold response. Maybe you shared good news and noticed a smile that felt incomplete. Maybe you sensed that some people celebrated your success only as long as your growth did not threaten their position. And that is one of the hardest truths to accept. Not everyone who smiles at you is happy about your growth. Not everyone who applauds your journey genuinely wants you to move forward. Not everyone who says, "I'm proud of you," truly means it. And that doesn't mean we should live suspicious of everyone. It simply means we should learn to observe. Because there is a huge difference between paranoia and awareness. Paranoia creates enemies where none exist. Awareness recognizes patterns that are actually there. Conscious people do not need to guess people's intentions. They observe repeated behaviors. They observe consistency. They observe coherence. They observe what keeps repeating over time. And the more self-awareness you develop, the harder it becomes to ignore this information. At first, that can feel like a burden. Because you begin to see things you couldn't see before. You start noticing emotional games. You begin recognizing subtle manipulation. You start seeing when someone shows interest only as long as there is something to gain. But there is tremendous power in that awareness. Because you stop depending on the image people project. You begin to see beyond the surface. Beyond the mask. Beyond the narrative. And that completely changes the way you relate to the world. One of the biggest emotional traps is believing that people should be judged by what they say about themselves. But the truth is that almost everyone knows how to tell a good story. Almost everyone knows how to explain their intentions. Almost everyone knows how to justify their behavior. What truly reveals a person is what they do when they are not trying to impress anyone. It is what they show when they believe no one is watching. It is the way they treat people who have nothing to offer them. It is the way they react to other people's success. It is the way they respond to boundaries. Because boundaries have an interesting effect. They function like an invisible detector. Genuine people may not always like your boundaries, but they tend to respect them. Fake people often interpret your boundaries as a threat. Because boundaries put an end to manipulation. Boundaries interrupt emotional games. Boundaries prevent unrestricted access to your energy. And when that happens, many masks begin to fall very quickly. Maybe you have noticed that some people changed completely after you started saying no. After you stopped over-explaining yourself. After you stopped trying to please everyone. After you chose your peace of mind over the need for approval. And if that happened, perhaps the most important change was not in them. Perhaps it was in you. Because the more awareness you develop, the less vulnerable you become to the illusions created by masks. And there comes a specific moment when that transformation becomes permanent. A moment when you stop wasting energy trying to figure out who is fake and begin to understand something far more powerful about yourself, your own awareness, and why certain people will never be able to manipulate someone who has truly awakened. A quiet transformation happens when a person develops genuine self-awareness. And this transformation has nothing to do with becoming more suspicious, colder, or more distant. In fact, the opposite happens. You begin to see people more clearly. With fewer illusions. Fewer projections. Less need to believe in idealized versions of them. And that may be the greatest insight of this entire video. Because true protection from fake people does not come from learning hundreds of behavioral signs. It does not come from becoming an expert in body language. It does not come from constantly trying to guess hidden intentions. True protection begins when you deeply understand yourself. That may sound strange at first. But think about it. How many times have you ignored obvious signs because you were afraid of the truth? How many times have you justified behaviors that hurt you? How many times did you sense something was wrong and stay anyway? How many times did you trade your perception for hope? In most situations, the problem is not the lack of signs. The signs were there. The problem is that emotional needs were speaking louder. The need to belong. The need for approval. The need to be loved. The need to preserve a certain relationship. And when those needs take control, our perception becomes vulnerable. We stop seeing what is actually there. And start seeing what we wish were there. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that the path of individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, requires the courage to face reality without masks. Including our own. Because there is something rarely mentioned when we talk about fake people. We all wear masks to some degree. We all hide parts of ourselves. We all try to appear stronger, more confident, or more balanced at certain times. The difference lies in the level of awareness. The difference lies in the willingness to recognize our own shadows. When you do that inner work, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing other people to be perfect. But you also stop accepting what is incompatible with your truth. You do not idealize. But neither do you deceive yourself. You observe. You notice. You understand. And you choose. That is true psychological freedom. Because many people spend their entire lives trying to change others. Trying to make someone more honest. More loyal. More transparent. More authentic. But that rarely works. The only consciousness over which you have real power is your own. And when you strengthen that awareness, the dynamics naturally change. Manipulative people lose their influence. Emotional games stop working. Masks become easier to recognize. Not because you have become smarter than everyone else. But because you have stopped betraying what you truly feel. Perhaps that is one of the clearest signs of someone who is awakening. They stop fighting against their own perception. They stop ignoring their inner warnings. They stop making excuses for repetitive behaviors. They stop constantly negotiating their peace of mind. And that changes everything. Because fake people depend on your disconnection from yourself. They depend on your doubt. They depend on your need for approval. They depend on your difficulty setting boundaries. But when you become aware of these dynamics, something interesting happens. You no longer need to confront everyone. You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need to convince anyone. You simply observe. And reality itself begins to reveal what once seemed hidden. Over time, you realize that masks always fall. Some fall quickly. Others take years. But they fall. Because maintaining a false identity requires constant energy. And no one can fight against their own truth forever. That is why so many people eventually reveal exactly what they spent years trying to hide. Not because someone exposed them. But because the truth found a way to surface. And when you understand this, you stop obsessing over figuring out who is fake. You begin directing your energy toward something far more important. Your own growth. Your own awareness. Your own awakening. Because in the end, the most powerful question is not, who is wearing a mask? The truly transformative question is something else. Are you willing to see what most people prefer to ignore? Because there is a profound reason why some people can recognize the true nature of others before everyone else. And that reason has far less to do with intelligence, experience, or observation than most people imagine. It is connected to something Carl Jung considered one of the greatest psychological achievements a human being can attain. And perhaps this is where everything comes together. Throughout this video, we have not only talked about fake people. We have talked about awareness, perception, self-knowledge, the ability to see beyond the masks that dominate so many human relationships. Because in the end, the greatest transformation does not happen when you discover who other people really are. It happens when you stop ignoring what your own awareness has been trying to show you all along. Carl Jung believed that psychological awakening begins when we stop running from the truth. And that truth is not always comfortable. Sometimes it reveals relationships that need to be re-evaluated. People who need to be observed more carefully. Boundaries that need to be established. But it also reveals something incredibly powerful. The more conscious you become, the less vulnerable you are to illusions. And perhaps that is the message you needed to hear today. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of this reflection resonated with you deeply. Maybe it reminded you of someone. Maybe it helped you understand situations that once seemed confusing. Maybe you realized that your intuition has been trying to show you something for a long time. If that's the case, subscribe to the channel now. This space is for people who seek to understand human psychology, the teachings of Carl Jung, the hidden mechanisms of behavior, the awakening of consciousness, and the path of true self-discovery. If this video stirred something inside you, there's a good chance that the upcoming content will also become part of your journey. And I want to hear from you. Does this message reflect what you feel? Have you ever seen someone reveal their true face without realizing it? Comment the phrase, "Masks always fall." Or share your experience in the comments. Your story may help others who are going through the exact same process of awakening and understanding. If this video brought value to you, leave a like. That simple action helps spread this message to more people who need to see what is currently hidden behind appearances. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who may be ignoring important signs. Someone who is beginning to awaken to the reality of human relationships. Now, don't stop here. The next video will dive even deeper into this topic and reveal psychological signs that expose hidden intentions before they become obvious to most people. Click on the next video appearing on your screen right now and continue this journey of awareness, perception, and transformation. Because what you learn to see today can completely change the way you understand people from this point forward. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next video.